Greetings, Embers, and thank you so much for joining me on today's birthday special. Yes, I'm another year wiser. Before I get started, I would love to give a very, very special shout out to my mother, Mama Phoenix. Mom, thank you so much for ages ago bringing me into this world. I appreciate you and love you to the moon and back. You are the rock and foundation of my life. I love you, Mama. All right, everyone. Today I have multiple stories within this compilation. Of course, I will read the title and their authors. I will attach the authors down in the description so you can go check out more of their work. Also in the description, you can find the link to the merch store for Phoenix Fire Narrations and Back to Ashes if you would like to take a peek and see what merchandise is available. If you are enjoying what you're hearing today, there's also another link so that you can buy me a coffee if you would like. It would be greatly appreciated, as I appreciate all of you. Now, tuck in, get warm, or get comfortable, and let's dive in to this birthday special horror compilation. My True Stalker Horror Story, written by InterscareWifey. It's been 5 years since all my story occurred. I was in my late 20s, and my son was only 5. I was living in Texas at the time, and my ex-husband had just been arrested and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I had literally moved across the country to marry this person and had put everything I had into the move. I stayed at the house where I was living. We rented from his parents. And the day he got arrested, his parents, grandma, and older brother moved back in. I was extremely overwhelmed and just became passive to the situation. The mother-in-law was quite overbearing almost immediately. The father-in-law was an alcoholic, and the older brother was a junkie. It became toxic very quickly, and I started seeking my independence and looking for an apartment. As soon as the older brother found out my intentions, he started making accusations that I was a whore, that I was doing extremely negative things that were completely out of character for me. His mother would feed into the behavior and encourage it. He stole my car one evening when I left my keys hanging up, did drugs in it, and brought it back all messed up. He would verbally abuse me, belittle me, humiliate me, and steal from me. I started standing up for myself, and I told the parents that either he was leaving or I was, because I no longer felt safe. This happened after he attempted to sexually assault me in my room that had no lock in the middle of the night. They were very upset and told him to go stay at their other house. They went to work, and while he was packing, I was unfortunately home alone. He decided that day to scream at me, and I screamed back. I was just so angry and hurt. He kicked me very hard and hit me in the face. He threatened my life, and I called the cops. He fled from the house. The entire next month was hell. I filed for a protection order, and that's when the craziest things happened. He put a picture of me on an escort site with my address and phone number. He ran to family members who didn't even know me and had them trying to beat me up. He physically dragged my ex-mother-in-law by the hair and broke her phone. She's elderly. And he stole his parents' vehicle, held my son and his parents at gunpoint. He left me voicemails threatening to kill me, chased me down the highway in the stolen vehicle trying to run me off the road, accused me of being a drug dealer to law enforcement, and I got raided. They found nothing. The day after I was granted my protection order, he came to my house, jumped the fence, let his violent pit bull out in my yard, and started breaking down the front door by slamming his shoulder into it. I huddled in absolute panic in the bathroom, begging 911 to get there fast. He was screaming that he was going to kill me. The police showed up and he tried to run, but they got him. There is so much more to this story, but some of it would be too graphic. I was never his romantic partner, and to this day, he's still in prison, and I have no remorse. Dripping and dropping dead Written by Scarinabox. At first, I ignored the dripping sound. Figured it was just raining, but the drip, drip, drip just wouldn't stop. No matter where I go, it's there. I've searched the whole house by now for the source, but no matter where I stand, it seems to be coming from just over my head. I called a plumber. They should be here between 10 and 2. I'm really hoping for 10. This sound is driving me crazy. I try to distract myself with music, but no matter how far I turn up the stereo, the dripping is still there, insistent, and just loud enough to form a backbeat. Drip, drip, drip. The plumber shows up. His eyes are red, like he hasn't been sleeping. I explain the problem, and he goes to look. "I've been hearing dripping sounds for several days now," the plumber says from under the sink. The leak clearly isn't there, but I don't say anything about it. He's the plumber. It says so on his name tag along with his name, which I'm certain he told me, but I've forgotten. The plumber keeps talking. "I'm starting to think it's some form of tinnitus because the dripping just follows me around." "This drip does that," I admit. "I can't seem to narrow down where it is." "Well, it isn't here," the plumber says, coming out from under the sink. His eyes look even redder now. I got a few more places to check." I follow him around the house. He's weaving a bit drunkenly, and I start to wonder if that is why his eyes are so red. Just my luck to get a plumber who can't find the drip because he's been hitting a bottle of scotch. "Been getting a lot of these calls," the plumber slurs. "You're lucky we could get you in. Seems like everyone has a leak they can't find these days." "Just find it," I say. The tapping, dripping, dropping, clacking sound makes it hard to be patient or kind. Perhaps that is why the first thing I think when the plumber drops to the floor is, I'm supposed to be thankful for this alcoholic showing up. My second reaction is better, as it clicks with me that something is seriously wrong with the plumber. I sink to the floor beside him and reach out. I call his name, which I only know because it is on the nameplate on his chest. I've forgotten his name even as I say it. He doesn't respond. A little pool of blood is spreading on the floor from his nose. The next bit happens in a whirl. I call 911 and paramedics show up. One of them has bloodshot eyes, and I find myself staring at that rather than at the corpse on my floor, because by then I know the plumber is dead. He hasn't so much as blinked since he fell to the floor. They take the body away and leave me with a little pool of blood slowly congealing on the tiles in my kitchen. When I head to get some towels to clean up, I pass the bathroom mirror. My eyes look a little bloodshot too. It is probably the dripping, makes it hard to sleep at night. Though maybe it's time to pick up a bottle of scotch. I'm not usually a heavy drinker, but something to help me relax sounds good. The next day, I'm sitting in my living room with the TV blaring in a doomed attempt to drown out the drip, drip, drip. Ugh. A report comes on the news that catches my attention. Mainly because I recognize the plumber's face. The familiar plumber snapshot is alongside a few others on a split screen. The details of the report are hard to concentrate on. Drip, drip, drip! Seems to wind in among the calmly state facts from the news reporter. But even that, I managed to get the basics. The person on the screen, including my plumber, are all dead. That part makes sense. The rest doesn't seem to compute properly. Even with my limited knowledge of biology and how the body works, the findings in these deaths don't seem right. When they brought my plumber to the hospital and examined him, there was no brain in his head. His entire skull was filled with blood. He was the first. Lucky me to have the first die in my kitchen and leave a pool of blood. The others are the victims that have come in since his death. All dead now, according to the newscaster, with her perfect lipstick and wide blue eyes. The CDC has been called in, and the newscaster gives a list of warning signs of this new disease. I barely hear most of it because it sounds more like a practical joke than a real thing. The only sign I really pick up is the dripping sound. The dripping in my own head wouldn't let me tune that factoid out. Apparently, all the victims heard a dripping sound, which the doctors and scientists are posting was the sound of blood dripping in their empty skulls, filling the place where their brain was supposed to be. I turn off the TV and head upstairs to bed, despite it still being the middle of the day. People can't live without brains. Ugh, even I know that. Despite being unreasonably exhausted, trying to sleep is hard with the dripping sound. I can't escape the repetitive noise. I shut my blinds, trying to blood out the sunshine outside, and climb back under my coverlet, and I find myself mulling over the TV report. It can't be real. How would they even know that the people had empty skulls prior to the dripping? Were people coming in to report this to them before dying? And who would ever have thought to look for such a thing? Outside my window, the sound of sirens screeches by, fading into a keening sound in the distance. By the time I finally drift off to sleep, I've convinced myself I imagined the entire report. I dream that I'm trying to find a leak in an old basement that smells of mold and copper. I find blood dripping down the walls instead, and realize I'm standing in a puddle of it. By the time I get back to the basement stairs, it is up to my knees. Morning comes and the dripping sound seems louder, more like a plop of water into a bathtub than droplets hitting the porcelain, like my brain is filling up. Except that thought comes directly from the news report that I must have dreamed of. I go downstairs and turn on the TV again as I make breakfast. There is a dried pool of blood on my kitchen floor. I should clean that up. I'm gearing up to do that as I eat some dry toast for breakfast, but the news comes on and distracts me. Pictures of the local hospital and a new set of faces fill the screen. I see a number, but I can't recall the death total a moment later. It must be hard to remember things without a brain, I tell myself. I don't listen to the newscaster's report this time. Instead, I pick up my smartphone and do my own research. The report I heard was real, or at least the report really happened. Lots of people are calling the disease out as made up or falsified. But I notice that everyone from where I live is scared. There are more reports of death, wives telling what happened to their husbands, children saying what happened to their parents, and every story starts with a drip that no one else could hear. I do some research on the doctors who were putting out the insane claims. They were all respectable before this, and the reports now chill me in a way I didn't expect because all of them are saying exactly what I thought. This shouldn't be possible. People can't live without brains, but they are. That makes me study the reports carefully, searching for the underlying facts, even if those facts contradict logic. The body count is up in the hundreds now. Didn't take long. The disease seems like it takes about 4 to 5 days in total. Now I'm sure of what the sound in my head is. It's a drip, slow and steady, of blood into my empty skull, filling the space left vacant. Drip, drip, drip. No matter how much I study the reports, there's no explanation for this phenomenon, nor why the person dies when the empty space is full. But they do, and by interference, that means I will too, unless I can figure a way around the looming fate. I cleaned up the dry blood from my kitchen floor, overflow from the plumber's brain. He should have drained it beforehand and bought himself some time. How full is my skull? I'm 3 days into this awful dripping. I got out to my car and considered driving away, but the dripping would just follow me. When I go back inside, I'm thankful I didn't try to leave. The TV tells me that the borders to the city have been closed. We are in full quarantine from the rest of the world. Another fact sneaks out to frighten me. Over 1,000 are dead, and that's just the ones who have been reported and tallied. There are only 2 things the city is doing now: dripping and dropping dead. That strikes me as funny, and I laugh. I could see my reflection in the kitchen window as night falls. My eyes are a horrid, shade of red. I wouldn't mind some scotch, but I'm pretty sure that even if there are places open out there, they wouldn't serve me. No one seems to know if this is contagious, but no one is taking a chance. We don't know what causes this plague, but the quarantine has people thinking that if it can be contained, that means that we are spreading it somehow. No scotch in the house. I lock all my doors and bar the windows as the night deepens. There are bodies in the street. I can't find a death toll online anywhere. No one is doing anything akin to scientific recording. I find several places where people outside the city are discussing what's happening. I try to leave comments, but my fingers don't seem to want to type anything sane. I can locate a few like me typing similar comments. All we talk about is the dripping. Drip, drip, drip. But it has started to sound like a ticking sound to me. After all, that drip is my life ticking down to 0. In the middle of the night, I hear a gunshot fired. Then another. Someone runs by outside my house, and I'm pleased that they don't fall down and die. There are enough corpses outside my house. When I survive this, I don't want those bodies to be my responsibility. No one out there is going to help me. Not those talking about this disease from their safe, unaffected cities, and certainly not the dwindling people of the city around me. I stare at my kitchen floor and think about the plumber. Ending up just like him is hardly appealing. So, I won't. His problem, I decided, was that he didn't have the information I do. He didn't know what was happening to him, so he couldn't address it. He didn't know that he didn't have a brain and his skull was slowly filling up. My leg up is that I do know those things. I wonder how we lost our brains and if we can get them back. But those are facts that I don't have. The people who come after me may have them, but I have to make do with what I know. And what I know is that when my skull fills up with blood, I'll die. A smile spreads across my face. I feel it stretching unused muscles. All I have to do in order not to die is to not let my skull fill up. I head into my garage and dig around in the tools there. I find my drill and bring it inside. Safety first. I wash and sanitize the drill bit. Then I leave my sink faucet run. I figure I can wash and rinse things as I go if it becomes necessary. Good thing I know my sink doesn't leak. I giggle a little. I'm getting silly. It is all the dripping, I tell myself. It is hard to focus with the dripping, and maybe, just maybe, it is hard to think clearly with no brain. The best place to go in, I decide, is dead center of my skull. I don't need to worry about hitting my brain, after all. I plug the drill in, put the bit back where it belongs, and picture the blood coming out of the plumber's nose. Obviously, that doesn't work as a drain before death, but I am smart enough to create my own drain. My head would never fill up. Nope. I'll just let that pesky dripping blood drain out the front. The back might have been a better choice, not to mess up my face, but I can't properly reach back there. Forehead, it is. I turn the drill on and press it to my forehead. You'd think it would hurt a great deal to drill a hole into your forehead, but the truth is, it doesn't hurt all that much at all. After the first surprise jolt, it is more like a toothache. Nasty but localized, and the knowledge it would be over soon keeps me going. The drill bit pops through the other side of my skull. I feel it because the resistance is gone, and the drill just slides forward. I pull it out and tip my head over the sink, letting the blood drain out and get washed away by the flow of water. I wonder who else had thought of this as I clean up bone fragments and blood from myself and my kitchen. Then, I wander into my living room. I don't turn on the TV. Can't hear it over the dripping anyhow. People are screaming outside. I feel sorry for them. I figured it out. I'm safe. But they are still out there in the worst of it. I go to the window to look out, peeling back the curtain. The world is fresh and new, vital. It looks redder than it did before. It's actually a little hard to see. Oh, I should have thought of this. The blood is draining into my eyes. No dripping now, but there is a lot of red. More than a tiny drip should account for. I can't see anything through the blood. Drip, drip, dripping over my eyes. I was sacrificed to my cult's god, but something strange happened. Written by Rosie Rose. To give some backstory before everything happened, yes, I was part of a cult. The cult, from what I knew, never had live sacrifices. They burned food and whatnot for their god, but that was it. Looking back on it now, they probably did have live sacrifices. I joined the cult because a few friends I had met in college were a part of it. After hearing them talk about it, I thought the cult wasn't so bad. I was dead wrong, but it was too late by the time I found out. I am ashamed I was even part of the cult, but at that time in my life, I was in a terrible headspace and wanted a place I can lean on and confide in. The cult offered just that for me. They listened to my problems and offered their support. They didn't judge me for things I did and things I experienced. Instead, they told me their God would help me. At first, I wasn't really there for belief in their God, but after a while, I began praying to it, and I did start feeling better mentally. I was part of the cult for almost a year, and I never noticed anything off. I should have paid more attention. Who knows how many people were sacrificed in the name of their God? The guilt from that still clings to me to this day. Anyways, sorry for dragging this on, but I wanted everyone to get a clear understanding about how I became part of the cult. It all happened on the night of a lunar eclipse in 2015. Earlier that day, I was messaged by one of my friends that was a part of the cult to come later than usual. I was curious as to why they wanted me to come later, but I figured maybe it was a surprise birthday party. Stupid, I know, but the cult made a point to celebrate birthdays. So, like my friend said, I arrived at the place the cult met later than what I normally did. When I walked through the doors, a bag was placed over my head. This naturally startled me until I heard my friend say, "It's just me. I'm taking you to the other room." I just thought that they really wanted to keep it a surprise, so I didn't resist. I only started getting nervous and scared when I began hearing the chants from the cult members. They only recited those chants when they offered up their food as homage to their god. Naturally, I had asked my friend what was going on, but they were silent. I resisted against them, but other hands grabbed me. I screamed and moved however I could, but it was no use. It wasn't long before they had me upon a table with ropes tied to my arms and legs. Regardless of that, I still tried to move. The chanting quieted down and the cult leader's voice rang out. "Brothers and sisters, what a blessed night for us. This poor lost lamb will be the final sacrifice to release our Lord from his imprisonment." Cheers erupted from the members as the bag from my head was removed. I stared up at the cult leader's face in fear. His smile seemed so genuine despite him holding a dagger in his hand. "Please, why are you doing this? Why me?" I asked. He patted my head. "Lost lamb, our Lord has done so much for you. It is time to repay his kindness. Our Lord has chosen you to be his final sacrifice. You should rejoice." Tears built up in my eyes. Nothing I said would convince them otherwise. After my silence, he mentioned to the members, and they began their chants once more. I cried and struggled against my confines more, cutting into my flesh to try to escape. The cult leader walked to the fire in the center of the room and placed the dagger's blade in it. He began chanting as well. He walked back to me. "Lord, we offer this lamb to you. May you accept this sacrifice and be released from your chains." As soon as he said those words, he plunged the dagger into my chest. The pain was horrible but quick. I felt myself grow cold as my vision blackened. Why? Why me? How could this happen? I don't want to die. Please, someone, something, save me. These thoughts rushed through my head, not expecting an answer in return.
Poor lost lamb, I shall grant you what you wish for.
Next thing I knew, I was waking up on that table, no longer bound by rope. I sat up and looked at the horrible sight around me. All of the cult members were dead. I looked down at my chest and noticed that there was no wound where the dagger was, just blood that coated my shirt and skin. Naturally, I was taken aback by this. I mean, I should be dead, but here I am. It was then that I felt a faint presence inside me. A presence that resembled the one that I felt before I died. Was this the God the cult spoke of? The presence felt dark and sinister. It made me sick. Once I found my legs, I stumbled back to my apartment in a daze. I refused to go outside for weeks. I couldn't trust anybody, and I was scared of what had taken residence in my body. I drove myself crazy trying to search for the identity of the being the cult worshipped, but I couldn't find anything. It wasn't until my brother showed up to my apartment, worried to death, that I decided to try and forget about the presence and what it was. But that was easier said than done. No matter what I did, I felt its presence observing me and the outside world. I almost felt as if it was trying to understand the world around it before it made its move. Not to mention, no matter what happens, I never get hurt or sick. I was involved in a car crash in 2018 where I should have died, but I was alive without a scratch on me. Later on, in 2019, I was mugged at gunpoint. The person who mugged me went to take off across the road and was hit by a truck that came out of nowhere. I know some of you might think it was just a coincidence that the mugger was hit by a vehicle, but I'm positive it was the presence that caused it to happen. After that, I cut contact from most people except for my mom and brother. Thankfully, nothing had happened to them. For whatever reason, it is ensuring that I'm not harmed in any way. Anyways, after the mugging incident, I began researching it once more. I searched scriptures of ancient civilizations, delved into mythology and religion, and even talked with theologians and mythologists. The only thing those experts and I found was a tablet that spoke of an ancient being sealed over a millennia ago. Since then, I've been searching even more diligently about the being, since it is the closest thing to this God the cult had worshipped. Whatever this thing is, I think I became its vessel when I was sacrificed. My research has come to a stalemate as of recently. There is nothing left for me to dig into. That is why I'm here, If any of you have any information concerning this, I'd love to hear it. I do feel guilty, however, because even as I'm writing this, I can feel it observing me and what I'm doing. I have no idea if it'll do something or if it can do something, but I can't continue on in constant fear like this. Again, if you have information, no matter how small, please tell me. I, at the very least, want to know what this present, this God is, especially since it has not revealed itself to me at all, even in a dream. I guess I would also like to add, don't trust people blindly. You may end up in horrible situations. After all, this all started because I met some friends in college. Hello, written by Inevitable Cookie 74. Dear human soul, you messed up. You heard all the warnings online not to play that ritual, but you did anyway. And now it's after you, all because of your stupid decisions. Idiot! How could you be so foolish? You humans make my job too easy. Well, don't fret. I'll help you. The man upstairs told me to. Said you needed a chance to live. Him and his second chances. I personally thought it would be more justified to just let you die and get dragged into eternal darkness. But here we are. Number 1. He begins his chase at 1:30 a.m. It would be wise to lock all your doors and windows before that time. Trust me, if you mess this up, you're not going to get a second chance. The entity will show up in your home, but his friends can and will come through the windows if they are left open. You can't take on all of them, so don't risk it. Lock your damn doors. Number 2. When the entity shows up, he'll be faint but noticeable. If you see anything that looks out of place, it probably is. Leave that room and go to another. If you remain in that room for more than 30 seconds, well, you probably already know. Number 3. Leave all your devices off. Somehow, the entity can get to you quicker through screens. He will try to trick you by turning on your TV. If your TV is static, he's trying to get to you. Either turn the TV off or smash it if you can't get to a remote in time. I'll get you a new TV free of charge. Boss's orders. Ugh. Number 4. After the TV and slight oddities within the environment don't work, the entity will go for your electrical power. Your home, or whatever you live in, will experience a blackout, and you will be unable to see. Don't worry, just find somewhere to hide. Yeah, I know it'll be dark, but just trust me and hold your breath. Find some way to stabilize your breathing and make yourself as quiet as possible. There will be no sound around you. The slightest tap will be audible to the entity. Number 5. Once the lights turn back on, don't automatically run outside your hiding spot. That should be common knowledge. It's obviously a trap to get you to give up where you are. You humans have issues following the simplest rules. Too many people broke this rule. Anyway, I'd say wait a few minutes for him to search the house and leave your hiding spot when you know he's not where you are. Number 6. I know this rule will only apply to those who live with others. Do not listen to a voice that sounds familiar. You're not in your home anymore, and that voice is not family or a friend. Obviously. Number 7. I forgot to mention this earlier, but when the entity begins his chase, do not go outside your home. As I previously stated, you're not in your home anymore. If you run outside, you will find yourself in another dimension where there is no escape. These rules won't help you there. I cannot help you there. Your best bet is getting on your knees, begging the man upstairs for mercy. Because those creatures out there surely will not. Number 8. Now, from here on out, the entity will be furious at your resistance, and he will send a creature to get you. That creature is called Sin, and he's like a dog of sorts for the entity. Sin has good hearing and a good sense of smell, so hiding from that thing is futile. I know his weakness is light. Not no dim light either. Get a really good working flashlight, and if he gets close, get him right in the retinas. I mean, he has multiple eyes, so this'll be easy. Unless you don't own a flashlight or any other bright light source. My only advice then is, try to outrun him. Number 9. If Sin doesn't kill you, then the entity will send him back to the pits where he came from and start hunting you down again until 7 a.m. Lastly, number 10. Once 7 a.m. hits, you will be returned to your dimension and left alone, hopefully for good. At that point, congrats, you've survived. I know what you're thinking. Sounds easy, right? Nope. About 200 people have done this ritual, to which I give them these rules to assist them, to which they decide not to read them and die clueless or break them all out of panic and die. I just hope you're not like them. Or honestly, I don't care. After all, God himself is giving you another chance rather than throwing you to me. Trust me, you don't want to deal with me. That's all I have to say to you. Have fun surviving the night, or don't. It doesn't matter to me. I might see you later anyway. Got a quota to fill, you know. Sincerely, Death. Beat It, written by Chronic Nightmares. Dirty Fred. We called the old man down the street for mine and my best friend and partner in crime, Eddie's house. Every day on our way to and from school, Eddie and I pass Dirty Fred's house with pockets full of eggs ready to be launched at his grubby windows. It was hilarious when he would come limping outside, yelling at us. "Beat it!" Old Fred would yell every time, his face completely red with rage. Tormenting Fred was our favorite pastime. When we weren't lobbing eggs at his house, we were kicking his front door before running away to hurl abuse at him when he came outside. "Fred, you dirty old tramp!"
"You kids want to learn some respect. Now beat it!"
Fred yelled, pointing a bony finger at us. After a while, Fred would go back inside, then peer through the gap in the curtain, watching us like a hawk. Whenever Eddie tried approaching for another kick to the door, Fred would shoot back outside, very quickly, too, for a limping man who looked to be in his mid-70s.
"Beat it! I won't warn you again!"
The look Fred's wrinkled face gave us in that moment sent shivers up my spine. It was more different than any look before. It had a sinister look. Eddie didn't seem bothered at all. In fact, he had an idea for later that night. "Meet me outside the old cunt's house at 12, Eddie said, with a twinkle of excitement in his eyes. "Oh, and bring a lighter." Later that night, as my parents slept, I climbed out of my bedroom window, then down the drain pipe, before quietly making my way to Dirty Fred's house. I waited for 20 minutes, but Eddie never showed up. His mom probably caught him trying to sneak out, before deciding to go home. On my way back, I noticed something laying on the ground in Fred's front garden. I moved closer to see it better. It appeared to be a half-filled vodka bottle, with a piece of rag hanging out of it. It was clearly a Molotov cocktail. Is this why Eddie wanted me to bring a lighter? I thought. But the real question was, where is Eddie? My mother woke me up the next morning with a concerned look on her face. "I just had Eddie's mom on the phone. She said he wasn't in his bed this morning, and she can't get a hold of him on his phone either. Do you know where he could be?" No, I lied. "Let me know if you hear from him. His mom is going mad with worry." I went outside and saw a police car parked outside Eddie's house. That was when the severity of the situation truly kicked in. Eddie was never found. But in the months after, rumor began to spread of the pale, eyeless boy in Fred's upper window who watched passers-by. Some say he had a regretful look about him. "56 West Tree," written by Erutious. Jeff had been a police officer for the small town of Briar for 6 years. The town had a population of about 7,000 and positioned as they were in the North Georgia hills. They didn't get a lot of tourist traffic like some towns in the area. Blair got its share of leaf lookers, people in vans or SUVs who come up to see the leaves change and clog up traffic for a few months. But they were usually gone by mid-November or early December. They blew away with the leaves, and Blair was left as sleepy and quiet as usual. The town had a Walmart, as all towns do, 6 restaurants, 2 chain restaurants, and 4 local spots, a hardware store, 2 gas stations, 2 red lights, and a small main street area sporting a dozen little shops. Briar had a combination K through 12 school, and the Briar Thorns hadn't gone past the local division since Clay Jackson took them to state in the late 90s. It was a small town that rarely needed the 4 deputies who assisted Sheriff Whitaker in the day-to-day protection of the town. So, when Jeff got the call about a disturbance at 56 West Tree, he had no reason to expect anything but local kids or town drunks. The station had been getting calls all night about the usual drunken relevers, but most had been about the strange occurrences at the abandoned farmhouse. At 2046, a neighbor called in a noise complaint from the plot of land that had once been fruitful fields. They claimed to have heard a loud crash from the abandoned farmhouse and asked if someone would drive by and check on the property. Jeff was on patrol when dispatch called it in, and he turned his cruiser into the slip and slurp parking lot and made his way out of town. The snow was falling again, and the roads were icy, but Jeff had lived here all his life. It was nothing new to him. He knew these roads like the back of his hand. 56 West Street had been abandoned for almost 5 years. The home was a piece of local legend, and the city council had been debating having it torn down as it slipped farther and farther into disrepair. Jeff had gone there many times as a kid. Most kids did. And he saw the old house silhouetted as it sat atop its hill. He could see the familiar farmhouse with its sagging roof and brittle walls. But there was a new element to the house that Jeff had never seen before. The car sticking out of the side of the house was definitely a new addition. He pulled his cruiser into the front yard. Lights trained on the car, and he drew his weapon as he stalked towards the smoking vehicle. It was a new vehicle, something sporty and sleek before the collision. Someone had driven their car into the side of the house and made a large hole in the wall. Jeff jumped as his foot came down on something and discovered further vandalism. Someone had also shattered the window of the old house, an action that seemed petty considering the hole in the wall. And after radioing in the incident into the station, Jeff started searching the scene. He looked through the hole, checking the small room for signs of the driver. The decrepit relic of a house was as silent as the grave, but Jeff was still hesitant to go inside. How often had he and his friends dared each other to go inside as they stood at the perimeter fence? 56 West Street was supposedly the most haunted house in town, and the local preacher had claimed many times that the devil's voice could be heard inside. It was originally owned by the Darkheroxx clan, a family who could trace their roots back to the town's founding. At least, they could have if there were any Darkheroxx left. Town legend was that 30 years ago, William Darkheroxx had walked into the sheriff's office on a dark and stormy night and laid a bloody axe on the sheriff's desk. He admitted to the murder of his wife and children, and when the sheriff went out to the house with his constables, the whole clan had been found dead in their beds. They had each been killed with a single axe blow, and not a soul had woken up during the attack. When asked why he had done this, William said that he couldn't let another Darkheroxx die for this town, and would instead drag his family tree up by the roots. He died in prison a few years later, and every family that attempted to live thereafter that had gone went missing under mysterious circumstances. Jeff's radio keyed up as he stood thinking about the old house's reputation and scared him near to death.
We'll send a wrecker out there in the morning. Car 3. Get back to your beat and just leave it alone.
Understood, Jeff said, stepping gratefully away from the hole in the wall. As he climbed back into his car, Jeff was a little relieved. The place still gave him the heebie-jeebies, and if he didn't have to go into the old farmhouse, all the better. Jeff was just starting his cruiser when a loud groan drew his attention back to the house. The roof was sagging under the weight of the falling powder, and as he shone the searchlight on his cruiser at the house, he could swear he saw something walk past the window upstairs. Jeff killed the engine and stepped out of the car, his eyes still glued to the upstairs window. He squinted as the spotlight covered the window, but the dusty glass was too caked to see much. Jeff reached for the door handle, but let it go again, as he turned back towards the house. Jeff had never mustered up the courage to go in as a kid, but if the perp was still inside, maybe even injured or incoherent, he would have to brave the confines of the Jaffereth homestead. He stepped in through the hole and into the dusty living room beyond. It was still furnished, and Jeff saw a sagging green sofa, 2 armchairs, and a cold TV, all covered in a thick layer of dust. Pictures hung lopsidedly on the walls, and a ballet of dust motes danced and swirled in the beam of Jeff's searchlight. He could see a line of footprints heading towards the stairs, and Jeff drew his gun as he followed them into the velvety darkness. The fact that they were bare with so much snow on the ground lifted the hairs on the back of his neck, and Jeff could see the barrel of his gun jittering as he mounted the stairs. The upstairs hallway was long and unfurnished, but he could see that only one of the doors was ajar, and made a beeline for it. Sweeping his gun about, checking his blind spots, Jeff pushed the door and listened to it creak open in horror movie fashion. The bed was a wreck. It had been small, holding only a bed and a nightstand, but both were shoved over and lay sprawled across what was left of the floor. Someone had torn up the floorboards, and a crowbar laid like a discarded snakeskin nearby. The hole yawned like some skeletal mouth, and whatever had been inside was now long gone. Jeff swung his light around, looking for whoever had moved past the window, and when his foot sank into the floor, he realized he had been careless. The edge of the hole had crumbled when he came down on it, and Jeff gasped as he sank up to the ankle. His light swiveled fretfully, searching for ambushers, and when he pulled his foot free, he saw that something was stuck to it. Jeff reached down and found the page of a book stuck to the bottom of his boot. He moved his light down and saw that his foot had come down on a book beneath the floorboards. The book was ragged, the cover moldy and bloated, and the page on his foot wasn't the only one that had come loose. There were a few pages inside the hole, and as Jeff looked, they appeared to be someone's journal. The ink was old and a little flaky, and it appeared that his boot had ruined the middle part of the journal. As he looked down into the hole, Jeff felt moved to take them, something he had never done in all his time on the force. He couldn't say if it were his subconscious or the voice of the devil, but he scooped it up and slid the ragged thing into his pocket, snatching the other pages too for good measure. When the radio crackled, Jeff jumped like he'd been caught doing something naughty.
Car 3, are you still with the vehicle?
The usually sleepy dispatcher sounded almost frantic, and it made Jeff edgy. He checked in, and the dispatcher told him to stay with the vehicle and under no circumstances to leave it. The vehicle he had found lodged in the side of the house was involved in a kidnapping case the next town over, and they were very interested in finding out where the perp had gone. Backup was on the way, and Jeff needed to sit tight and wait for further instructions. Jeff said that he copied and headed down so that he could sit by the car until help arrived. He came back through the hole to find the car still lodged in the breach. Jeff took a seat on the cold metal bumper of the vehicle, listening to it click and groan. But as the wind howled and the snow fell, he decided it might be more comfortable in his squad car. As the snow came down and the windshield clouded with snow, Jeff pulled the moldy book out of his pocket and thumbed through it. The dates inside went back about 120 years and occurred during the founding of the town. The owner talked about leaving their home and traveling to this little piece of nothing. After the move, It was mostly entries about farming or building, but one particular entry caught his eye. December 12th. I had a meeting tonight with the town elders. Honeycutt and Treen want to forgo this year's sacrifice. They don't want to build an altar and claim we have other, more pressing things to worry about. More pressing matters? Did we not leave our homes and forgo our lots in life so that we could worship as we saw fit? Did we not run into the hills so we could start over? I spoke with the others after they left, and Norwell and Reader want to make an example of them. Mayhaps this year we've already found our sacrifice. Norwell. Jeff knew that name. The Norwells were big landowners in the area, and the Readers owned the library and the land the municipal building sat on. He flipped over to the next day and read about the construction of an altar out in a clearing near a large pool of water. Unless there were many such places near here, that had to be Harder's Den, a place Jeff swam as a kid. They had quarried stones and used them to assemble the altar. This didn't seem weird to any of those involved, and over the next few days of entries, they detailed preparations for a sacrifice. Jeff had never read anything in the town histories about sacrifices before, and the idea that they'd been held in a place he had gone to as a child was a little frightening. The rest of that month was full of talk about winter storms and heated arguments between the elders, culminating in a chilly entry on December 24th. December 24th. Treen came to me last night and offered documents that implicate Honeycutt in sabotage. He attempts to undermine the altar, would see it unworthy of the Green Man when he comes. As such, his family now stands as sacrifice. My son William doesn't understand. He and Marcia Honeycutt are very close, but he will understand the reason in time. When something pollutes your crop, you must draw it up by the roots so it doesn't poison the field. I can hear their screams as I write this. He has found them. Jeff was shaken out of his reading as the blue and white lights approached. 2 town cop cars were sailing up the driveway, followed by 6 state troopers and a black town car that might have been FBI. Jeff stepped out of the cruiser, laying the book on the seat. The town cars had 4 other town cops and the sheriff as well. He pulled himself out of the cruiser, the wheels groaning a little as his weight left the seat, and walked over to Jeff. He pumped his arm a single time and asked for a report on the situation. Jeff told him about the car, showed him how it was wedged in the side of the house, and explained that the driver and whoever he might have had with him were nowhere to be seen. As they spoke, Jeff couldn't help but notice the man in the black suit as he stepped carefully out of the car. As they trundled in the snow, breath steaming in the cold, the man organized them into groups and told them to get moving. He wanted the house searched top to bottom, asshole to appetite. But when Jeff went to help, he called him onto the porch instead. He wanted to know what Jeff had seen, and Jeff hesitated as he thought of the book. Suddenly, Jeff felt an urge to hide its existence from the man, but shook it off at once. He was an officer of the law, and if the book could help their investigation, he needed to tell him. He grimaced as he handed him the moldy old thing, but skimmed it over as the cover left stains on his leather gloves. His face grew severe.
Have you read this?
Some. The first 10 or so pages. It sounds like a journal, sir. I figure it's Jaffroth's, the family who used to live here from when the town was first founded.
Does it say anything in there about a sacrifice? Maybe even a green man?
Yeah, it does. How did you...
I've been following this case for a while now, kid. Where does it say their altar is?
It sounds like it's down at Harder's Den. It makes sense. Harder's is only a mile or so in the woods that way. If they had a spot out there, it would be easy to get to from here. And they could... The man nodded as he called to the men inside. The stomping of boots preceded them, and as they arrayed on the porch, the sheriff was red in the face from the exertion. He asked if the blustery old man knew the spot the book talked about, and the sheriff nodded as he pointed up the road. He set the book down with a thump, looking up the road where the sheriff pointed, and Jeff could see the excitement plain as day on his face.
Excellent. Let's go. We can still catch him if we hurry.
He turned to the assembled men, looking at each as he spelled out what they were going into the woods to do.
Listen up, because I want total silence once we're in the woods. This guy has a kid with him, and he's getting ready to sacrifice it to some make-believe bugaboo. He's a nut, and he's not a stupid nut. Keep your eyes open and be ready to mow him down if necessary. I'd hate to lose this kid, but this guy has killed 10 people in the last 5 years. I'll be damned if I let him escape. Sheriff Krish, you stay here with the vehicle and let the officer come with us,
he said as he pointed at Jeff, preparing to go. Sheriff Krish was monstrously fat and pushing 60, but he seemed to bristle at the idea of being left behind. He didn't like wandering through the woods under the best of circumstances, but he certainly didn't want to get left behind, so some wet behind the ears rookie could take all the credit. He glowered at Jeff, and the young officer didn't even need to ask. He'd worked with Sheriff Krish long enough to know that he would not stay here while the most significant case of his career happened around him. His next word saves Jeff's life, though he doubted the sheriff knew it. "I've come this far with you, Agent Reinhold. Let me finish this up with you." Reinhold grinned at him, and Jeff suddenly hoped they would ask him to stay behind. That grin looked ghostly.
Very well then. Lead the way to Harder's Den. You, stay here with the vehicles,
he said as he pointed to Jeff.
We'll radio if we run into trouble. Here, keep this safe until I get back.
He pressed the journal against Jeff's chest, and the shaking officer had little choice but to catch it as the men ran back to their cars. With that, the expedition set out towards the woods, and Jeff watched from the porch as they disappeared into the trees. As he stood on the porch, the wind blew against him, cutting right through his thick police issue coat. Jeff decided to climb back into his cruiser, the car cranking after only a few tries as the heater drove away the chill. He opened the journal to the page he had left off and thumbed through the entries after the first sacrifice. It was mostly town meetings, growing records, and stockline reports. But amongst them were prayers to the Green Man for a bountiful harvest, or graven images scratched into the page, so they might never be erased. The town began to grow up around the collection of farms, and some of the founders moved their families into the town to set up shops and establish a community. The Jaffriths continued to live in the farmhouse on the outskirts of town, and a year after their first sacrifice, there was to be another. December 24th. Trees seemed shocked when the mark appeared on his door. A lot of people seemed shocked, but they needn't have. Treen was a traitor and a naysayer. He invited that minister into our community, invited him to establish a church here, and just expected the rest of us to go along with it. Nay, the man must go. We will drag him and his whelps from their beds if we must. We will pull them up root and stem, and have an end to Treen and his ilk. The fires are stoked and the altar is built. Tonight he comes for his sacrifice. Who was this him? Jeff wondered. Was it this green man the book mentioned earlier? The green man they spoke of was a mystery to him. Jeff had lived in the town his whole life and had never heard of this green man. If he was a throwback to times gone by, then why was there no mention of the green man in the town's history? Maybe this was one of those things they wanted to sweep under the rug, Jeff thought, and read on. The radio crackled, dispatch looking for updates, and Jeff checked in, telling dispatch that he was still at the farmhouse. Someone from the woods checked in as well, letting dispatch know they were still in pursuit and making their way through the woods. As dispatch copied, Jeff returned to the journal, finding that the start of the town's third year was more than a little turbulent. February 4th. The town prospers, I suppose, but our way of life is in jeopardy from these outsiders. When we came here, 10 families looking for a place to worship and be free. It was so we might draw strength for our shared faith. Now this minister, Reverend Lundgren, has established a church and drawn a flock. The farmers and settlers from the nearby areas have come into town and fallen under his spell. As his influence grows, he believes he can hold some power here. Curse Treen, curse that man down to the soil. He invited the man here, and how he has burrowed in like a chigger. Even some of our town have fallen for his poison religion. More the fool there is but one God, and he is green and terrible. Mayhaps we will see come winter whose God is stronger. The next few months were clouded with shadows of war between the church and the Green Men's followers. The Reverend Lundgren, a figure Jeff had read about in town history, preached venom against pagans and other earth religions. He called them profane, the foolish ideas of uneducated men. And by autumn, only 6 of the town elders were still among the Green Man's fold. All of them had lost a member of their family to the flock, as they preached of love and life everlasting, a much more hopeful message than the bleak teachings of the Green Man's followers. The writer's words became barbed and filled with threats the further Jeff read. And the cold wasn't the only thing that made him shiver. August 1st. As I smelled the air this morning, I could feel his power rising. Every leaf upon the tree says, "Burn me in his honor." Every plant in the field hopes to be laid upon his table in thanksgiving. Every drop of blood within my body cries out to be used by him, and I am powerless to disobey. The 5 of us, Moore, Reeder, Krish, Norwell, and myself, have met to discuss what must be done. Clads, Dykes, Norith, Gobbler, and Jackaroo have betrayed us, and it is from their homes that we shall draw our sacrifice this year. Willing or not, pure or not, we will have our vengeance upon those who have wronged us. Reeder and Moore have returned to their homesteads, and though Norwell abides in town, he has moved his family back to his farm so that more of them may escape the taint of Lundgren. There is a war coming, a battle of faith, and I pray that we are all resolved to it. September and October went by uneventfully, but when October came, there was indeed a bounty. October 4th. Gobbler has returned to our fold. He claimed that his leaving was for spying and information gathering, and we pretended not to know what we have known since the two of us were children in the woods. Garius Gobbler is a weak vessel full of fear, and I feel sure that even Lundgren knows it. He does bring news, though. Lundgren fears that who worships in the woods. He thinks us pagans, Gobbler claims, and maybe oddinists. To Lundgren, though, any religion, not his own, smacks of hellfire, and he has lumped us with all who worship Satan. As though my lord were not a mailed fist that men cringe to mention. When that red imp was still upon the tit, I have been at thought lately about this year's sacrifice, and I believe I have the perfect one. Perhaps it's time that Lundgren was properly welcomed into this community.
Car 3. Car 3? Do you read? Over.
That was Terry Knorr. Terry and Jeff had gone to high school together, and though they hadn't run in the same circles, they were brothers in blue now. Jeff keyed up the mic and copied, and Terry asked if he could see the fire from the farmhouse. Jeff got out of the cruiser and looked towards the woods, realizing he could see a fire. His mouth hung open as he climbed back into the cruiser to radio the fire department. If left to its own devices, that fire would likely burn down the whole forest. He had reached for the knob so he could turn it to the right frequency when Terry asked him again if he could see it. "I see her, Terry. Do you want emergency services down to put it out? Over."
Negative. It's contained. I just wanted to know if you could see it. Damn near burned my eyebrows off from a mile back. Over.
Jeff laughed and told Terry that he copied before hanging up the mic. He was a little jealous of Terry, off in the woods with the sheriff while Jeff was here watching the vehicles. Jeff supposed Terry had seniority since he'd been with the force since the two graduated high school. Besides, Jeff thought as he picked up the book again, this was starting to get good. The old book creaked again as he opened it to the spot he'd left off, and as Jeff read on, he realized that things were about to get worse. December 1st. Norreath tried to come to the harvest celebration yesterday, but we turned him away. His son, Jensen Norreath, is with us and wouldn't even look at his father or family when they arrived. He did speak to his two oldest brothers before they left, and I feel we'll have a few more Norreaths around before year's end. I will not charge the children with the father's sins. The green man draws only the loyal to him after all. Norreath tried to warn me before he left, telling me that Lundgren knew we were planning something, and if there was to be a fight, the priest would fight. I invited him to tell his false savior that we too would fight, but only time will tell if a fight is needed. There was some weird static on the radio, but it went dead pretty quickly. Jeff looked at it for a few minutes and then got back to his book. December 15th. We have chosen our sacrifice. Her loss will bring fear to the flock and make the old man look weak. We will take her on the 23rd. Let them look for her if they will, but her bones will belong to the green man.
Agent Reinhold here. Does anyone copy?
His voice was hushed and whispery, and Jeff made his low too as he keyed up the mic and told him to go ahead.
We have a visual on the suspect and the child. We are fanning out to capture. Maintain radio silence. We will advise when we have apprehended the suspect.
Then, the radio went dead, and Jeff clicked a double break so they would know he had copied. Then he turned back to the book. The next few entries covered Joffrith and his allies as they planned the abduction. This particular Joffrith was firm in his conviction. but not so subtle as he maybe should be. It appeared that he had misstepped at some point, because the entry on the 24th contained none of his usual snarling, bravado, or religious sureness. His entry on the 24th sounded downright scared. December 24th. All is lost. We are surely dead. They found our altar, found us as the wind was rising and his horse was approaching. They came from the woods with crosses raised, and scripture called loud and proud. It all died when they saw him. When his horse walked from the wood, his antlers on full display and his axe raised, the ire was in his voice, and they ran like rabbits. We ran too, all of us separated in the storm, but I managed to bring most of mine home before we froze to death. Mama, Jesse, William, Fawn, David, and I are now locked inside and huddled in the basement as a blizzard surges around us. I know not what became of Raymond or Cass, but I trust that they are safe or in his legions now. As far as the other elders, I pray that they have made it away into safety. As for our enemies, may they taste the full brunt of his fury. The next entry was dated January 2nd, but as Jeff turned the page, the radio erupted in the sounds of gunfire.
Dispatch, send help to Herder's Den. We have been ambushed. Officers down, weapons hot, shots fired, repeat shots.
But the radio abruptly went silent. Jeff sat in the car, his shivering having nothing to do with the cold. What had happened out there? Were they okay? Whoever had been on the radio said officer down, which meant wounded or dead. Jeff had started to leave the vehicle when dispatch called him over the radio.
Be advised, do not leave your vehicle. Do not enter the woods alone. Wait for the backup to arrive. Do you copy, Car 3?
Jeff wanted to tell dispatch that he copied no such thing and head into the woods as fast as he could. But he knew she was right. If Jeff rushed into the woods, he wouldn't do anything but get himself killed. He sat back down, little as he wanted to, and waited for the blue and white lights he knew would be coming soon. Jeff's eyes strayed back to the book again and again, and he dared not pick it up. This was no time for distractions. Jeff didn't need someone sneaking up on him while his mind was elsewhere. But as the minutes spooled out, he grew weaker. Jeff felt his hand stretch down for the book, and when he opened it, he saw what was to come next. It appeared that there was little more town history to be gleaned from this journal. January 1st. The blizzard has stopped. The winter lord in all his anger has finally blown himself out. Now we see what is left. Krish and Reader have come to see us. My Cass having spent the last few days with the Reader clan. He didn't come back alone either. It seems our clan is to be joined to the Readers. Cass spent the last 8 days with Shemia Reader. And now comes spring. The two wish to be wed beneath the green boughs. The Moors came next. Chactus Moor has perished in the storm, but his brother Erutious has taken the clan and Chactus's wife as well. As for the Norwells, only the patriarch survived. In time, he may rise a new family, but only time will tell. January 2nd. We returned to town today and found the wrath that the Green Man had been for them. The niece of Lundgren, Charlene McNeil, is safe, but her uncle has been lost and may never be found. His flock has come about her, holding her as a sort of saint. But as we approached, she had the sense to parley. Now we work out terms of inclusion." Jeff heard something and glanced up, eyes cast back to the woods. He expected to see a small horde of green barbarians creeping up on him, but there was nothing to see. He wondered what had drawn his attention, and only then realized what it was. The fire had gone out. It was a lot darker out there, without the towering light that had graced the woods. But as Jeff stared into the white forest, he realized he could see something else. The trees were swaying, bending as something got closer to the house. It was moving through the woods, bending trees as it came, and before his eyes, Jeff saw tendrils of frost creep across the glass. The snow had been falling in a sluggish pattern, but began to pick up as the frost gathered. Suddenly, something hit the side of the cruiser and rocked it on its shocks. The force smashed the sides of Jeff's head into the door, and as he fought to stay conscious, he heard a blizzard roaring outside. Jeff tried to crank the car, meaning to leave despite what dispatch said, but it wouldn't start. He pushed the door, knowing better than to go out in a blizzard, but was helpless as claustrophobia crept over him. The door, however, refused to budge. As the storm raged on around him, Jeff hunkered down in the cruiser and massaged the side of his head. It wasn't too bad, though the bruise would definitely hurt the next day. He wondered if this was what the Jaffrith clan had felt as they hunkered in their cellar and listened to the storm rage outside. That thought brought him back to the book, and he reached for it with trembling fingers as he tried to find his place. The name Charlene McNeil made him very interested to see how this ended. Charlene McNeil was another of the town's founders, someone every kid learned about in school when it came time for local history. She had helped to unite the town, been its first mayor of sorts, and helped unite the townies and the faithful. There was a picture of her on the mural at Town Hall and a bronze statue of her outside the courthouse. But none of that was what had piqued Jeff's interest. He was curious because she also had the distinction of being his great-great-grandmother. January 5th. They have seen the might of the Winter Lord, felt the ice of the Green Man, and now they believe. We have come to an understanding that they may stay in town and worship their God as they choose, and we may own their land and worship our God in the fields and the farmlands. We will bring our harvests into town, and they will buy our food to lay by for winter. We will allow them to stay, and they will provide us a sacrifice on the 23rd of December. The mark shall be left upon the door of their house, as it was in times gone by, and one shall come forward to be sacrificed. Thus it is, and thus it shall always be. As the dome light flickered and the battery died, Jeff read on though. He didn't need to. It was all a matter of family history. Charlene McNeil and William Jaffrith, the oldest Jaffrith male, had fallen in love and courted secretly. When William's father discovered them, he cast his son out, and he went to abide in the town forever after with his God-fearing wife. He had taken her name instead, and a rivalry existed between the McNeils and the Jaffriths forever after. It had held until the last Jaffrith had seen the mark upon his door and knew that his fellows had betrayed him and sought to punish him for the impurity of his kin. The Jaffriths had begun to try and repair the damage of their past. He had been trying to reconcile with the McNeils, Jeff's family, and, for this, they had been punished by those in the farmland. William Jaffrith, named for Jeff's great-great-great-grandfather, had decided that he would rather see his family dead than give any of them over to the madness of his so-called neighbors. Jeff was too young to remember any of this, and none of his clan ever spoke about the Jaffreths if they could help it. They were a stain upon their family tree, and Jeff's father had always told him to be careful around families from the farmland. You will be hated by them for both the Jaffreth side and McNeil side. Best to keep your friends in town and leave the farmers to their crops. As Jeff lay huddled on the seat of the cruiser, his jacket drawn around him, he heard his father's words rustle like dead leaves in his head. Jeff suddenly felt that he was very likely to die here. He didn't know what had suddenly brought a blizzard here. What had suddenly put this piece of family history in his hands, or even why he had stayed after the gunshots. But Jeff felt as though this was bringing him to the end of his life. As the ice and snow blew around the car, something that suddenly didn't feel so secure. Jeff shook his head to keep himself awake. You would have said it was impossible, but Jeff began to feel very sleepy as the cold settled around him. Jeff felt sure that this would be the end as he slipped off. As he lay shivering, he wondered if he'd see Hida when he got where he was going. The thought did nothing to warm him, and it occurred to him that it was the first time he had thought about his sister in years. Hida had disappeared in the woods around Christmas time too. Jeff slid off into a dream of his younger sister, the one who had disappeared when he was 12 and she was 10. She was always 10 years old in his dreams, her corn silk hair flying freely around her face as she tried to keep up with her older brother and his friends. Hida had been spirited, a trait the woman in their family seemed to share. She was utterly fearless, not prone to the squealing many girls found when presented with a frog or a snake. In his dreams, he saw her standing in the yard of this very house, looking up at the same window he had seen the shape in earlier tonight. It was the last time he had seen her, and the image was frozen in his mind forever. Jeff had always been too scared to go into 56 West Tree when he was a kid. He had been afraid that his great-great-great-grandfather's ghost would find him there and punish him for the sins of his family. His friends' boys, who may or may not have known his lineage, also teased him for being a scaredy cat. But no amount of teasing could ever get Jeff to go into that house. Just standing outside that house, Jeff could almost feel how much it hated him. He would no more have gone inside 56 West Tree than he would have cut off his own thumb. However, there was one person who always said they would go inside. They had done it many times, and none of the boys would dare say a thing to her. She was one of them, and she could do and say anything they could do 1,000 times over. Hida, who had disappeared into that house when she was 10, was just as tough as any of the boys. Jeff remembered how they had all been daring each other to go in, telling each other that they were cowards for not going in. After all, Jeff's little sister would go in there, so why wouldn't they? Jeff and his friends had just been murmuring, booing each other up to go in, and when Hida had spoken up, all four had jumped a foot. "You big babies, let me show you it's not so scary." She had looked up at the window before going inside, just like she was in his dream now. When she had gone missing in that house, the whole town had turned up to search the woods for her. Well, the townies had, at least. Most people thought she was just playing, anyway. Hida, who felt more at home in the Jaffreth house than she ever did in the brick 2-story they'd grown up in. Jeff jerked awake as the door was wrenched open and was blinded by the snow that blew into his face. He reached for his gun, unsure of who or what had opened the door, but it was none other than Terry Knorr. Terry was a mess, but he still smiled at him as Jeff took in his disheveled form. Terry looked like he'd fallen into the swimming hole. His hair and face were muddy, and his uniform was smeared with mud or blood. Despite this, Terry seemed in fine spirits. He shook his head, dousing his smile down to a line on his mouth, and clicked his tongue at Jeff. "Now, I'm not sure if I should keep such a man as this on my force, I tell you what." Jeff let a smile stretch across his face as he wrapped the man in a bear hug. Friends or not, it was nice to be reminded that there were still people out there. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? Your force, huh? Better not let the sheriff hear you talking like that." Terry's face became serious, his glee melting like the snow. "Chris is dead, McNeil. He caught a bullet from one of the state boys and went down hard. If it hadn't been for her, I don't think any of us would have gotten out alive." He nodded behind himself, and out of the shadows stepped a tall, robed figure with a mop of blonde hair and a half-crazed smile that seemed likely to split her head in half. Jeff had hardly gotten out of the car when the woman scooped him into a hug. Jeff went rigid, feeling like a rabbit that was about to be devoured by a hawk. She had a definite aroma of the woods about her, and when she released him, she brought her face very close to his. Jeff stared into those half-crazed eyes and was surprised to discover he knew her. Hadn't he just been thinking of Hida? Hida smiled at him.
"Happy Yule, brother. I've been about his work, but I'm back now. I'm back now, and we have much catching up to do."
A small group of grubby officers came staggering out of the woods behind her, Agent Reinhold hanging limply between two of them. He was bloody but seemed to be breathing. Jeff could see half his face was burned, a long and angry swatch of skin, and the men holding him seemed as elated as Hida. Jeff looked back to his sister, her pale hands holding a long, cruel knife as he held it out for him to take.
"It's time for you to do your part, Jeffrey. It's time for the Green Man to have his sacrifice."
Reinhold lifted his head a little, begging Jeff for help, but Jeff hardly felt he had any choice. He could hardly take 4 grown men and his feral-looking sister on his own, and with each step, Jeff felt sure that this was the right choice. Reinhold struggled, but he had come to the same conclusion that Jeff had. After all, Jeff thought, as he slid the knife across the agent's throat and let his blood patter to the snow, it was in his blood, wasn't it? Flesh, written by Scare in a Box. Consciousness came suddenly. He found himself in an empty corridor, completely silent. The walls, ceiling, and floor were made of a strange material, soft in appearance as if they were covered in velvet. There was a soft light illuminating it with a reddish tint. "What's this empty corridor?" he thought. He tried to look back, and it was at that moment that he realized that there was something strange. Something with his body. He couldn't feel it. He didn't feel his legs, his arms. He didn't even feel his eyelids, and, now that he came to think of it, he hadn't blinked since he was awake. Had he opened his eyes when he regained consciousness? He didn't remember doing it. Why can I not see my body? Why can I not feel it? The deathly silence was interrupted by a mechanical sound. A strange feeling invaded him. How was it possible not to feel the body but to feel that? A kind of electric current, throbbing, compression, pain. It was pain, and it ran through him as if his body was constantly being crushed. He searched for the source of the sound. He didn't know how he could focus without feeling his eyes, but he did. A machine was running down the hall. It looked like a metallic spider. Its elongated body had at least 8 legs that moved, sticking their ends into floors and walls. Those ends were blades, sharp swords that cut through the soft material the corridor was made of. And with each cut, a wave of pain washed over him. But he couldn't scream. It was impossible for him. He couldn't feel his face to open his mouth, his throat, his lips. He could only scream in his mind. Why? It was the only thing he could think of. Why is this happening to me? Hello, human. A synthetic voice, as if it were a computer, spoke in his mind. Welcome to the body simulator. It paused. Body simulator? What was it talking about? Your body was discarded and your brain preserved. Don't worry, you will be kept connected to our amazing technology forever. The voice seemed too happy to be communicating that information, and he, meanwhile, felt how terror flooded him more and more. You were connected to the cameras in this corridor, as well as the artificial flesh that covers it. Don't worry, we have plenty of pain-inducing pets to keep you going for ages. Panic washed over him. Had he still had lungs and a beating heart? He was sure his breathing and heartbeat would have increased 100%. He yelled into his mind once more. The metallic creature continued to walk down the corridor, cutting skin. His skin, with its blades. The only thing he could hear was the sound of bushes moving. Why are you doing this to me? I didn't ask for it. I want my body back, he screamed into his mind, the only way he had to communicate. Nobody answered. Even knowing that he didn't have a body, the instinct was stronger, and he tried to move his arms, hit things, kick. Nothing worked, of course. Despite being connected to the corridor, nothing changed in it. The pain kept going through him. If he left it, he was sure that it would take over his mind completely. Get me out of here, he screamed. He cried. There were no tears, of course, but he could feel himself crying because he remembered the feeling. I don't want this. I never asked for this. The pain stopped suddenly. The machine had stopped moving. The corridor was completely silent again, as was his mind. The reddish light reflected off the metallic body of the creature, giving it a reddish hue as well. From a certain angle, it seemed to be on fire. From another, it seemed that his mechanical eyes, lifeless, were full of anger. He basked in relief, for he didn't know how long. How to know how much time passed in that place? How to know that the minutes passed at all? Everything was static and silent. Nothing changed. That unsettled him. Hello? He asked. Is there someone? There was no answer. The synthetic voice did not speak to him again. Was he still alive? He couldn't feel anything, only his thoughts. If not even time passed there, was he even existing? An incredible anguish invaded him. Did he exist? Had he ceased to exist? His brain was still alive. That's what the voice had said, but was that enough? If he continued to have a body, he was sure he would have a lump in his throat. He would be biting his nails, shuffling his feet, biting his lips. The only thing he could do, however, was change viewing angles. He didn't understand how he was doing it, but he could change his field of view by going from one camera to the other. He saw the corridor from various angles. The flesh that covered it was the same on all sides. He couldn't even see the parts where the machine had cut him. He had healed automatically? Maybe. The machine itself was still static. Some of its legs were stuck in the ground, but the others were in the air. He couldn't feel the perforations. He didn't feel anything. Please, get me out of here, he thought. He couldn't do more than that. Think. I want to return to my body. He wanted to cry, to lie on his bed and cry there all night. This must be worse than dying, he told himself. Dead, at least he wouldn't think anything, right? Or at least that's what he supposed. That led to another question. Can I sleep? He asked him to nothing. Again, no one answered. He tried to do it, falling asleep. But how to sleep when he didn't have a tired body? He tried to stop thinking, to make his mind relax so he could fall prey to sleep. He used the techniques that he used when he had insomnia. Nothing worked. His brain was still working. Consciousness did not leave him. He still didn't know how much time had passed. Hours? Days? Years? It was impossible to know. He felt that he could go crazy in that place. Was he going crazy? Was madness possible in such a place? If he had no body, if he was isolated, if he was just a brain floating in some strange liquid that kept him alive, what defined insanity? All of this was crazy. More silence, in the corridor and in his mind. Again, trying to sleep without any success. Again, an indefinite time without feeling anything at all. What have I become? Am I even human? His thoughts were now scattered. Something flashed through his mind, and had he had a throat, he would have burst out laughing. Please, turn the machine back on, he thought. Once again, no one answered, but the metallic spider began to move again. The blades ripped through his skin, pain washed through him, and he finally felt again. He could cry, scream in pain, and in happiness. He felt again. He was human again. Material Girl, written by Chronic Nightmares. Jane, with her blonde hair that shimmers under the moon, her eyes like emeralds as they glisten in the sunlight, and her bright red lips, so plump, so kissable. You will see her coming a mile away, adorned in her eye-catching, real leopard skin coat. And you can't miss the distinct sound of her high heels that had probably cost the life of an elephant to make, or left them tuskless at the very least, for the heels were made of ivory, producing a very distinct clapping sound with each step she made. Jane had never worked a day in her life. She didn't need a job to fund her exquisite tastes. She had a very rich husband to pay for all of her materialistic desires. Whatever she asked for, her husband bought it for her without question. Hey, that new iPhone looks cool. I'll pop into the Apple store on my way home from work and buy you one. Her husband was like putty in her hands, just flutter her gorgeous, long eyelashes at him, and he melted like butter. A talent that Jane had worked on her entire life. Manipulation was her specialty. She had drove her father to bankruptcy with her never-ending demands as a child. Daddy, I want Barbie's Playhouse, and I want a Nintendo Wii and a Nintendo DS. You know I can't afford that, sweetie. Pretty please, Daddy. Oh, I can't say no to those eyes. Stress would eventually cause her father to have a massive heart attack, just 2 months after Jane's 21st birthday. He died alone in a hospital bed. She never attended his funeral. Her first husband, a rich oil tycoon from Texas, had served her well, until his gambling addiction started to dry up their shared wealth, that is. With only a measly $30 million left in the bank, Jane was not willing to risk losing more of her half of the money. Divorcing him at this stage would have only given her $15 million. She didn't want peasant's change. She wanted all of it. And as luck would have it, she did receive all of it. After a nice sweet cup of arsenic tea, her first husband was dead, and her bank account became $30 million richer. Cha-ching! Her current husband, despite being much richer than the others, has started to become boring, and the intimacy in the bedroom much more tedious, and lately, dormant thoughts were fluttering away inside her brain again. Hide the taste with lots of sugar, and the arsenic goes down very easily. Jane hummed I Want It Now by Verkura Salt as she placed a Yorkshire tea bag into her husband's Chewbacca mug. As she brought the cup of tea to her husband, she began to hum a different tune. A spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. I played a horror game written by Darkheroxx. I've been a streamer for a little over a year, or rather I was a streamer up until last night. I only had 40 subscribers, but I tried really hard to make something of my channel. I tried all sorts of videos from DIYs to mukbangs, but nothing really stuck. My videos would have about 10 or maybe 20 views on a good day, but I wanted more. I watched other streamers trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, but no matter what I did, my views wouldn't get any higher. So I got on Twitter and made a post asking my followers what kind of videos that I should make. Most of them just liked the post, a few retweeted, but none of them replied. One evening, I was in my bed scrolling through and groaning over what to do next when I got a message from someone. Their handle was Phobos, and all they sent was,
I have a suggestion.
I didn't recall having a follower by that name, so I decided to look at their profile. I clicked on their page, but it was completely blank. No posts, retweets, followers, nothing at all. I was thinking that it was some sort of bot or something, so I ignored their message. I dropped my phone to my side, and as soon as it hit the bed, a notification rang. I looked at my phone again to see another message from Phobos.
I have a suggestion for more views.
I decided to just shrug it off and humor them for a bit. I replied with, "Oh, awesome. Thanks for supporting my channel. What did you have in mind?" What they sent me next was a link. A string of letters and numbers highlighted in blue. I know this wasn't the best decision, but I was so damn curious I couldn't resist clicking on that link. I was brought to a site that was completely black. For a second, I thought my phone had turned off. Slowly, red letters started to appear on my screen that formed the words, Phobia, along with an image of a beating heart, cartoonishly splurting out blood. More text came on the screen. Fear-inducing experiences. It wasn't the catchiest tagline, so I didn't think anything of it when I pressed on the heart. I felt a light vibration underneath my thumb, then the window simply closed. I went back to my inbox to find that Phobos and his messages were gone. I was sure that I must have clicked on a virus or something, so I spent some time looking up ways to clean my phone up. Thankfully, there seemed to be nothing wrong. I sat in my room in silence, trying to figure out what to do next when my computer's monitor turned on. I thought my computer was turned off, so I stepped over towards my desk to shut everything down. That's when I saw an icon in the center of my screen, a small icon of a red heart. I'm not sure how the icon even got there, but sure enough, it was the same heart that was from the link. I'm not much of a gamer. I play things pretty casually, and horror games are something I just never got into. I know a lot of streamers record themselves playing and reacting to horror games, so I thought that I should suck it up and start doing it too. I had everything set up for a live stream, and as I started it, I waited for a moment until I had a few viewers at least. About 10 minutes had passed with 0 viewers. I was about to stop the stream altogether, but I thought I should at least start the game and see what happens. I clicked on the icon and the screen blacked out. Slowly the word "Start" in a bold red font came into view. I took a deep breath and mentally prepared myself to get scared. I looked to see that my stream had gotten 3 more viewers. I played up my nervousness a bit, hoping to entertain whoever was watching, talking about the channel a bit and telling them how much I hate being scared. No comments yet. I suppose they were filling me out. After a bit more of my one-sided conversation, I clicked the start button. The game was in a first-person perspective. I was in a dark square room surrounded by stone walls, each with a torch on its surface. My character slowly picked themselves up from the floor, and when I was upright, I was able to move around. I had my headphones on and there wasn't any music, no trace of sound effects, just absolute silence. I looked around to see no doors or openings, just 4 walls and 4 torches. What kind of game is this? I said to myself. I glanced over to see that I now had 15 viewers. I tried to contain my excitement as the viewer count slowly rose. I thought maybe this wasn't a bad idea after all. I set my focus back onto the game and continued to look around for some kind of objective. I moved my cursor over one of the torches and a prompt appeared on the screen that said, "Kill the light." I clicked the torch and a satisfying hiss filled my ears as the flames went out. I went to 2 more of the torches and did the same to them, my screen beginning to dim as each flame went out. I stood in front of the last bit of light that I had from the torch in front of me. I looked at my views to see that I had over 50 people watching me. I couldn't help but grin a bit as I acted afraid for the viewers as I glided my cursor over the final dim flame, and a prompt appeared. Are they watching? Did it really say that? I quickly moved back to the flame and the prompt, "Kill the light," appeared. I thought it was just my imagination, so I continued the play through as normal. I extinguished the last light and my screen went black. I sat there a while pressing at the movement keys, hoping that the game didn't crash, when I heard something through my headphones. The noise sounded like it was right next to me, a wet squish as if something was moving through mud. I removed my headphones to look around my bedroom. Nothing was out of the ordinary, just a dark room lit by my monitor. The moment I placed the headphones, the noise continued, even louder than before. I thought that the game was bugged somehow. I wasn't sure if I was moving at all in this darkness and the noise. That noise was making my ears ache. I apologized to my viewers and muted the game's audio. I let out a sigh of relief for not being able to hear that damn squishing sound, until I heard something else. I was sure that I was home alone. I was sure that my bedroom door was locked, and I was absolutely sure that the game was muted. But why was I hearing shallow breaths coming from behind me? I took off my headphones and turned around, but nobody was there, but the breathing continued in my ears. I could feel it behind me, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Even after I took off my headphones, I could still hear the breathing right behind me. I could feel the short bursts of air hitting the back of my neck. I quickly closed out of the game and stopped the stream. I spent the next hour curled up beneath the blankets on my bed. I spent that time with my hands on my neck, with my breathing nearly held to listen out for whatever was behind me. I jumped at the sudden noise of my phone vibrating on my desk. I had a moment of clarity as I thought about how childish I was acting over playing some broken game. I lifted my sheets to find myself in the darkness of my room, of course. I slowly stepped over towards the direction of my desk and found my chair. I turned it to take a seat and repositioned myself in front of my monitor. I felt for my phone, and after a moment of fumbling around, I was finally able to find it. I turned it on, and the bright light from the screen caused me to wince. I looked at my phone to see that I had a private message from Phobos. I opened the message to find another link along with a message.
They're still watching.
I clicked on the link, and it was a full video of my playthrough of that game. I was surprised to see that it was posted just an hour ago, right after I had ended my stream, and it was already at a couple of thousand views. I wasn't sure if I should have felt angry or what, but as I scrolled back up to the video, I watched an absolute horror as I saw an online of a head appear from right behind my chair. I just sat there and watched as the room got darker from me taking out the torches. The face would pick itself up, revealing a thin shape of a body, and move closer to my head. I paused the video right before I took out the last light, and I was able to see. Its face had nothing but a mouth. The rest of its exposed flesh was covered with small eyes. Its naked thin body, its pencil-like arms, everything was covered in lidless eyes. With the video paused, I could see that each eye was pointed towards me. I couldn't help but stare at the eyes, and though the video was paused, I could feel them staring at me. I could hear each eye with their wet, squishing movement go towards me. Once again, I could feel that breath hitting the back of my neck. I slowly turned in my seat, and I was met face to face with whatever that thing was. Each eye wriggled to look at me, and its mouth was open to reveal a black void that released that damn shallow breathing. I was absolutely frozen in place as it lifted its hands and grabbed my face. I felt the eyes move around on my cheeks. The feeling of the wet and cold orbs on my skin made me want to throw up. Despite the bile rising from my gut, nothing came out of my mouth, not even a scream as it moved its face closer and closer to mine. I couldn't let out a shriek, but my body knew the fear as it shook uncontrollably. I was helpless in the grasps of this thing. I didn't want to look at it anymore, or rather, I didn't want it to look at me anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut. Not its breath was hitting right in my face with the eyes on its eyes still moving against my cheeks. I tried to turn my head away, but it was so strong my neck couldn't budge. I heard something, a distorted deep voice that filled my ears that said,
"I'll always be watching."
Then I felt it release my head, and when I opened my eyes, it was gone. I dashed to my bedroom door, and sure enough, it was still locked. I looked back onto the phone and the video, the link, the message. It was all gone. I went on my computer and scoured the internet for any trace of the game. Anything. But there was nothing. I went through my streams, and God, there was nothing at all. I turned on all the lights in my apartment. I covered myself in my blankets, and I cowered in the corner of my room. It said that it was watching me, and I can still feel its eyes on me. I went online and I deleted all of my videos. I don't want to look at me. I don't want its eyes on me ever again. I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was surrounded in darkness, and I could hear the eyes move. I could hear its breathing behind me. Hours had passed until morning finally came. It wasn't a nightmare. I don't know what happened. I thought that I had gone crazy until I got a text message from an unknown number asking me if I wanted more views. Now I'm here, still so afraid. and I don't want anyone, anything, to look at me ever again. The Cave, We Don't Belong Here challenge, written by Chronic Nightmares. It's a tight squeeze, John said, shining his flashlight into the narrow opening of the cave. Don't look like it gets any wider further in either. Let me have a look, Larry replied, before taking the flashlight and shining it into the passage. Nothing we can't handle. Larry crawled into the narrow entrance first, and John followed closely behind. The air took on a damp, earthy smell as they both squirmed their way through the tight, jagged tunnel. Neither were claustrophobic. Both being avid splunkers, they were normally comfortable being in enclosed spaces. But this was unlike anything they had experienced before. The further they got, the tighter the squeeze became. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the floor and ceiling of sharp rock compressed their chests tightly, making every breath a struggle. After almost 30 minutes of crawling, a widening of the tunnel appeared before them, and they could finally move to a crouching position. Ugh! Finally! I was on the verge of a panic attack there, Larry said. You and me both, John replied. They both continued ahead, through a more forgiving yet labyrinth passageway. The further in, the more it widened, and soon they could stand up fully. Yet now they were met with a new challenge. Which way do we go? John asked, staring at the maze-like twists and turns of the passage. I don't even remember what way we came in, Larry replied. Turns out John didn't remember either, and soon they were both in a desperate search for a way out. For hours they searched, and in doing so, they unknowingly went deeper into the cave. The passages were now covered in a thick forest of spider webs, and it unnerved them how tough the webs were. They stuck to the skin like industrial-grade glue. John had tried to peel a bit off his hand, and he winced when a layer of skin was peeled with it. Let's go back. I don't like this, Larry said, trying to untangle his feet from the webbing that had become wrapped around his leg. The more they struggled, the more tangled they became, and soon they were both trapped like flies. Suddenly, a sound came from the dark tunnel ahead. It sounded like the pitter-pattering of many legs. The webbing began to vibrate, and both John and Larry were now watching the tunnel with a terrified stare. They saw its eyes first, 6 red dots peering at them from the dark tunnel. Then, it slowly emerged from the darkness. It was unmistakably a spider, but neither John or Larry had seen one this big. It was the size of a car. Its large mandibles scissored and salivated as its 8 legs carried it scuttling towards them at a frightening speed. Larry didn't have time to scream before the spider was on him and wrapping him up for lunch. John, however, did have time to scream, but it wouldn't help him. The Hungry Fangs of Tolliver's Grove, written by Scarinabox. Death slept in a house at the end of Tolliver's Grove. It hadn't always slept there, but found the house to be conducive to its needs. Once Tolliver's Grove was a bustling bedroom community, but it relied on a nearby factory of prosperity. When that factory shut down, all the managers and accountants who'd brought the cozy little houses nearby drifted elsewhere, leaving only husks behind. The creature likes such husks. It was a thin, fragile creature with weak limbs incapable of much in the way of physical defense, so shelter was essential as it laid in wait for life to consume. It only needed to feed rarely, and this house was perfect. Every so often, something with a beating heart and warm red blood would enter. It would take its sustenance and wait. Death slept in the house, but things that sleep can also wake. The creature didn't have a name, as it was not aware enough of the world outside itself to understand the need for a name. But out in the world, it might be called a vampire, or its penchant for drinking blood and leaving hollowed-out husks behind. Like vampires of human legend, it vaguely resembled a human in shape and coloring, but that is where it diverged from conventional expectations. Rather than fangs and claws, the creature had an extra organ on its back that resembled a hump, and rather than a human head, its features more closely resembled an anteater with large blood-red eyes. Death slept most of the time, but on the evening in question, the creature woke. It smelled blood in the air, and its stomach rumbled. Its long, thin fingers rubbed over its hairless head as it woke and then down over the top of its hump. Hundreds of holes spread over the top of the hump. It used these to feed. When it was ready, hundreds of tick-like creatures bred inside the hump would emerge, gather the blood the vampire needed, and then it would eat the ticks until it was satisfied. The noises of the house told it that prey had entered. Prey in this instance was a group of urban explorers who had heard whispered rumors of the house on Tolliver's Grove. People said odd things happened here. Locals said the house was haunted. Some went as far as to say the whole street was cursed, and the explorers had come only for the one house. They brought trappings of modern discovery, including cameras, EMP detectors, headlamps, and sleeping bags to stay the night. The creature knew none of this. It only knew a meal had arrived. Nor did the noises these people made make any sense at all to it. Human speech was no more meaningful than a bird's warbling, except, of course, the creature knew that the people had more blood and that these noises meant people. In this case, it was 5 people, 2 couples and 1 single, a proper feast. The creature listened to their noises as a way of tracking them around the house. When their voices got too close, it would creep away. If needed, it would sequester in a closet or climb up in the vents. Once it shimmied up inside the flute at the back of the fireplace to move from the first floor to the second floor. "It certainly looks creepy in here," one of them said. "Sometimes these local haunted houses are just disappointing, but this place had an aurora. I love it. Let's take a brief look around," another said. "Then we'll pick spots to set up for the night." They clambered over the house looking for things of interest, exclaiming over this or that as they moved. They particularly went crazy over an upstairs bedroom with a chimney connected to the downstairs fireplace. Their EMF devices went off there, though they might have been interested to know that the only supernatural thing present was in exactly the opposite direction at the time. The vampire hunkered in the shadows, mostly in a closet. The mill smelled delightful, and it waited for them to settle down into one spot so it could pick its own place for the night. Its consumption method worked well with its prey close to the vampire, since the vampire didn't actually feed upon its prey directly, but sent out hordes of little blood-sucking fleas to gather its meal. "We should stay in the fireplace room tonight," one of the explorers said. Her name, though the vampire neither knew nor cared, was Eve. She was the newest member of the group and as such always tried a little too hard. Her boyfriend was part of it and had talked the others into bringing her along. She'd been telling her own friends that he was the one. The pressure of making things work was especially strong for her. Unlike the others, she noticed the odd piles of fur around the edges of the room, leftovers from the vampire's meals. But she was afraid to point it out and have them laugh, so she said nothing. Eve's boyfriend Joe, throwing an arm around his girlfriend, said, "This room's good." He had been sleeping with Eve's best friend for a few months until the other woman broke things off and threatened to tell. Given this, Joe was particularly preoccupied with making sure he seemed innocent and not at all focused on finding supernatural clues. "Eve and I will stay here." The other couple claimed one of the side bedrooms for the night. Grace and Kelly didn't want to be exploring with the others anymore, but they hadn't told each other that. Both of them kept it a secret for the others' sake. Only the uncoupled guy was left to select a spot to sleep that night. He glanced nervously around him. I guess I'll stay downstairs. Someone should." Truth was, he really didn't mind the distance from the others. He suspected none of them took this seriously, at least not as seriously as he did. George really believed in ghosts and the supernatural. His parents had died when he was young, only 15, and since then he had a personal mission of proving things on the other side of the veil existed. What did worry him was the feel of the house. It was too quiet without any of the usual evidence of animal intrusion. If asked, he would have said the house seemed unnaturally quiet. No one asked. "There are no bedrooms down there," Grace said practically. "Are you certain you want to sleep there?" She smelled particularly good to the vampire, so he tracked her words closer. "I don't need a bedroom," George said. "It always feels like a horror movie when we camp out places like this," Kelly said. Grace leaned her head on Kelly's shoulder. "Let's hope not, since I think only Eve comes anywhere near final girl status." "You sure you want to sleep alone?" Kelly asked. "In horror movies..." "This isn't a horror movie," George snapped, then smiled to soften the harsh tone of his words. The house had him on edge. They went back to exploring, and the vampire hid. Ticks buzzed inside its hump, preparing for a huge meal. It would need a lot of ticks to transport so much blood. Most would end up wasted. The vampire could only ingest so much, but it wasn't interested in food conservation. Each of the nearby creatures were provided a snack. Grace would be the main course. The skin on its hump rippled and a few stray ticks emerged from the holes. Nighttime came, as it always did, after the day slowly frittered its time away. The people did not immediately go to sleep, which irritated the vampire vaguely. It was hungry and red-blooded things usually fell asleep in a timely fashion. These, however, turned on odd false lights and lit the house well after the sun was down. George and Joe lit a fire in the fireplace, and the vampire didn't like the smell of the gas they used to help ignite the small blaze. Luckily for the vampire, they put the fire out when Eve complained it made too much smoke and wasn't exactly heating anything. Finally, they pulled out their sleeping bags and settled down. The vampire found a convenient spot between a defunct toilet and a shower. It was directly between the two couples, and it felt the heat pouring off of them, allowing it to easily track them. When their heartbeats slowed with sleep, it hunkered down, positioning its hump above it like a turtle's shell, and emitted the first cloud of ticks. Eve was the first to feel the ticks bite. She stirred in her sleep, smacking at her lip where they first settled. Then the cloud fell in force. She woke, eyes flying wide, and she tried to stand to fight, but millions of fleas clouded over her, and in the end, she didn't fight at all. The deadly mantle settled around her until all she saw was a rippling blackness. She slipped into a deeper sleep, an eternal one. Meanwhile, the vampire put off another cloud of ticks, and another and another. It kept pumping them out as fast as it could. It had lived in the house a long time, and in that time, its ticks had chewed tiny holes through the walls, ceilings, and floors. They traveled without impediment through the house and the rooms, swarming under doors, but also just seemingly blooming out of the woodwork. Joe woke up more quickly, perhaps alerted by Eve's brief struggles. He managed to get to his feet and stumble a few feet, swatting at the air, at the seemingly endless cloud of death. He caught a few ticks that had already fed, splatting droplets of his own blood along with ticks over his body. His head grew light, and he fell. He crawled a few more feet, dragging himself toward some impossible salvation. By this time, the vampire was feeding, slurping in snotfuls of ticks and drawing the blood from the tiny bodies. Grace and Kelly felt the bites of the ticks at the same time. Kelly might have made it to the window and attempted to jump to safety, if not for Kelly stopping for Grace. Kelly wouldn't leave without Grace, and she passed away without ever waking. It might have comforted Kelly to know, as death stole over them both, that leaping from the window wouldn't have stopped the ticks. They would have been just as happy drinking from her out on the grass as inside the house. Death came swiftly, drained one drop at a time, but by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of ticks. The vampire gorged itself on Kelly and Grace. Already there was too much blood to consume. Many of the ticks were dying around the room, in piles against the walls. It didn't see any point in creating more ticks for the creature downstairs. It ate until it could not eat no more, and then it hunkered down, closed its great red eyes, and fell into a dreamless sleep. Unfortunately for the vampire, humans weren't like its usual mindless prey. Had it been a family of raccoons that fed the vampire that night, then it would have slept deeply and long and woken refreshed. This was not what happened. Instead, it woke smelling smoke. It twitched and opened a red eye to thick air. Piles of ticks still lay around the room. It might have snacked on some of them later, if not for the heat and smoke quickly filling the upstairs bathroom. The vampire scuttled out of the room and into the hall, only to find the same problem there. In fact, it saw flames coming from some of the rooms and from the stairs. It let out a high squealing noise, the only sound it ever made, and turned to climb up into the vents, but they were hot, burning its skin. Fear of death is ingrained, and it turned out that even this creature of death could feel the racing pulse of terror at the idea of its own life snuffed out. There weren't many options of where to go. It could have braved the windows and jumped down, but didn't see any clear path out that way. It hurried down a few of the stairs, but found its way to the front door blocked by flame. There was one last avenue. It ran over to the chimney in the second-floor bedroom. It had on occasion shimmied up or down the flute to get someplace. This time up seemed more tempting, but if it reached the roof, it feared it would be trapped there. Its limbs were too thin and fragile to survive the fall, so instead the creature used its long hairless arms and legs to propel itself through the tight chimney flute to the ground floor. Then it crawled from the chimney, skin coated in old ashes and eyes stinging from fresh smoke. There was a clear path to the back door. It ran out, smoke billowing after it. Behind the house was an expanse of woods. New woods since back when the factory off of Tolliver's Grove had been functioning. It was a park. The vampire scurried towards the trees, but glanced back toward the line of houses along the street. Perhaps it briefly considered simply switching houses, but something instinctual told it that this was not wise. and the vampire's last glance of the street, it saw George in front of the house watching it burn. The flames cast a bright, hungry glow, and a thick plume of black smoke curled up into the sky. George's face was covered in tears, and he held a red gas can. The vampire wasn't hungry, so George didn't interest it overly much, but it did wonder briefly what the red-blooded man was doing. It couldn't have known and wouldn't have cared that George had woken early to find his friends dead and the inexplicable hordes of ticks covering the entire house. George had finally found his proof of the supernatural, and he really wished he hadn't. Though, if he'd stopped to think of it, maybe he would have been glad that he wasn't in a horror movie, and survival wasn't really predicated on final girl tropes. The vampire headed off into the woods. If it carried anything with it from the experience, the vampire held a slight sorrow at losing his stored snack in its feeding grounds. But both things had happened to the vampire before and would again. Death lives a very long time. Skin Deep, written by CorpseMacabre. On the anniversary of his twin brother's suicide, Bradley kept his 8th and final appointment, 6 hours per visit, immobile and painful. He'd arrived early, sitting in his rental car, staring at a small steel urn in the passenger seat beside him. It contained what remained of his late brother, Benjamin. It'd been difficult locating and convincing a professional tattooist to blend ashes into ink, but his determination led him to Japan. There, he met the world's most reclusive, renowned portrait tattoo artist, Shin Lao Sun. The portrait covered his entire chest, an uncannily perfect reproduction of the last photograph he'd taken of his brother. In it, Benjamin stood at the edge of a pier, his hand shading his eyes as he smiled for Brad's camera. It was the last time he'd seen his brother happy, long before he'd spiraled downward into paranoia, depression, and suicide. Weeks after it had fully healed, he awoke one night to a burning itch of the tattoo. He stumbled into the bathroom, squinting into the mirror as he slathered ointment onto it, and crawled back into bed. He hadn't noticed his brother was no longer smiling. During the night, he had horrific nightmares. Benjamin had returned from the dead, but instead of a joyous reunion, there was only bloodshed. "Why did you bring me back, Bradley?" Benjamin moaned gravely as ash spewed from his mouth. In his hands, he held the same revolver he killed himself with. He placed the barrel against his temple, and Bradley jerked awake, panting and drenched in sweat, reassuring himself it was just a terrible dream. He returned to bed, swallowed a few Thorazine tablets, and washed them down with vodka. He slept for 16 hours without dreaming. When he finally crawled groggily out of bed, the maddening itch had returned. He began to squirt some of the ointment onto his hand to apply to the tattoo, when a hoarse voice whispered, "I wouldn't do that, Bradley." He recognized the voice immediately. Looking down at his chest, it appeared that Benjamin was emerging, pulling himself away from the pier. His lips contorted in a leering rictus of malevolence as he tore through Bradley's skin. He shrieked, ran to the kitchen, and snatched a paring knife from a drawer and began carving and peeling away the tattoo. Rivulets of blood pattering to the linoleum as he did. All the while, his brother groaned in agony. Days later, when he regained consciousness in the hospital, his mother was at his bedside. "Why'd you cut yourself, Brad?" "To get rid of the tattoo. He came back. Who came back? Benjamin, Mom. Your son. My brother. Tattooed on my chest. She lifted the sheet from his chest. He saw nothing but a few small bandages. The tattoo hadn't been harmed, but it was different. In it, Bradley saw that Benjamin was no longer in the scene, just an empty pier. Honey, we've been through this before. You've never had a brother. And that, dear Embers, is the end of this fantastic horror compilation. Thank you so much for joining me on my birthday and celebrating with me in these chilling horror stories. Again, if you would like, down in the description box, there's a link to the merch store if you would like to check that out. Also, if you have enjoyed what you've heard, there's a link where you can buy me a coffee. It would be much appreciated, as I appreciate you. And thank you for supporting the channel. As I always like to say, when life gives you fire, become a phoenix. I'll be reading to you all soon. Ciao, everyone.